Hey everyone, Ads here. On today's show, we are speaking with NASA climate scientist, activist and author Peter Kalmus. Peter is someone who's very much involved in the climate crisis at all levels, and we discuss the importance of the work being done at NASA with their satellite data. When the moment was that Peter decided to become a direct action activist, and why, how the media frames climate change and the consequences of the next US election. I found Peter to be extremely passionate about the reasons why he does what he does, and I really hope that what he says will resonate with many of you. As ever, thank you all for taking the time to watch or listen, and if you can, please give this episode a like and a share. Now on with the show. Welcome everyone to the Green New Deal podcast, part of your favourite environmental platform, GND Media. I'm Adam Williams, and today I'm joined by producer Andrew Glassford. Andrew, how are you, mate?
Very well, lads, very well. Happy New Year. It's all kicking off as we head towards oblivion. That's not how I want to start this year. I don't want to start like that. I'm doing great, ads. I'm doing great. Let's start with a chipper perspective this year.
Yeah, well, let's do it. And today, mate, we're joined by NASA climate scientist Peter Kalmus. Peter, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. And I should say I'm speaking on my own behalf. I always have to add that. Unfortunately, I wish I could speak on behalf of more people, but
yeah, awesome. Yeah, disclaimers everywhere. Yeah, no problem at all. So, Peter, if we were to do a poll of 1,000 people and ask them what NASA does, I reckon 999% of it, or 999 people, would probably most say that flying rockets is what NASA does. But you're a NASA climate scientist. So tell us a little bit more about yourself for those in the audience that don't know who you are, but also some of the things about NASA that potentially they don't know that NASA does.
Yeah, so I work at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and they're probably most famous for putting rovers on Mars, which is super amazing, and it's a really fun place to work. They also have missions going to, outer planets. They were responsible in part for sending the Voyager satellites, which have traveled outside of our solar system. So all kinds of cool, amazing stuff. Definitely my favorite NASA center. Sorry, other NASA centers. They're all amazing, but I really like JPL. But one thing that I think most people don't really realize is that NASA is also the premier institution on our entire planet in terms of putting up satellites that monitor the Earth itself. And that's incredibly important in an epoch of accelerating climate change. So we have satellites, for example, that can measure the loss of ice in the two main ice sheets on our planet, Greenland and Antarctica. And it's amazing how they do that. It's a pair of satellites that's orbiting around the planet, and when in low orbit, and when the lead satellite gets close to like a mountain range or a giant ice sheet, it'll accelerate a little bit because of the gravitational tug, and the distance between them will increase a little bit. But then, like a slinky, the back one will catch up, and by those tiny, like fraction of a human hair differences in the distance between the two satellites, you can infer gravitational anomalies on the Earth's surface, including things like disappearing aquifers, but then also like this record of the ice sheet loss. And we also have a satellite that I've worked with a lot, has an instrument that has a record going back over 20 years for temperature and moisture profiles in the atmosphere. And so that's an incredibly important record too. And you can even infer surface temperatures from that. We've got satellites that can look at the temperature of the ocean, the height of the ocean. We've got satellites that can look at forest loss and forest fragmentation, biodiversity, land cover, cloud cover. And that's just barely scratching the surface. So combined with the in situ data, which is very sparse, but like highly accurate point measurements, then you have this like picture of the entire Earth that you can use to augment. And both are important for understanding how our planet's changing right now.
Yeah, that's absolutely incredible. I didn't know that about all those satellites,
Yeah.
but some of the audience may not have done so. Thank you for that. Well, just going back to about you as a person as well, Peter. How did you get into these sorts of areas? And also, as well, what I always like to ask new guests is: was there a moment, or was it a series of events that made you realize that the climate crisis was so big and all-encompassing that you felt that you had to dedicate, at the very least, your professional, if not your whole life, to it?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So it took me a while to, I think I'm constantly reassessing what I need to do in response to this knowledge. And
Yeah.
I'm also just like constantly wondering what's going on inside other people's brains. So I definitely want to talk with the three of you, or the two. I think the three of us should talk about like what's going on inside our own brains and like kind of how we can infer what's going on in
Yeah.
other people's brains, because it's just endlessly strange to me that people just can, like most people
Just get
can
on with
go
it.
about their days so well when, when my brain's like
Yes.
basically constantly freaking out and saying like, we've got this information that we're in deep, deep, deep trouble. And yet like the majority of humanity, and especially the humans with all the power, are taking us further and further into that deep, serious, deadly trouble that we're in right now, which all could have been avoided if, 20 or 30 years ago, we'd actually taken it seriously. So yeah, like 20 years ago was when, roughly 2006 was when I really started to realize we were in a serious emergency. And back then in that year, there were three really powerful things that kind of pushed me into that knowledge. Before that, I'm a little ashamed to say that before 2006, I was kind of blissfully ignorant, just like going about my life, maybe how the same way a lot of people today are still doing it. Although in 2006, we didn't really have serious global heating impacts and heating disasters, the floods and the fires, the rain, the rainstorms, the droughts, the heat waves that we do now. So I think now it's like super obvious and super unavoidable what's happening. You have all these news stories. Back in 2006, there was still some question about whether the signals were all detectable or not. And, the media kept saying, I remember back then pretty distinctly, it was always like, the framing was, we better start doing something about this, 5 years from now. There was no sense of urgency back then.
Yeah.
But anyway, the three things that really kind of grabbed me by the collar and shook me and got me to understand what was happening. One was Al Gore's movie Inconvenient Truth, which kind of scared the bejesus out of me, and then said like, what could I do? Like at the end, it was like, what can you guys do about this? Change your light bulbs. And I was just like, that's not, I mean, I guess that was nominally better than recycling. I think there's a lot of people out there right now who think they have to recycle harder, and that's what's going to solve all of these, environmental problems. And people don't totally distinguish between different kinds of environmental problems, like the plastic crisis versus global heating, which are quite distinct things. But yet still change your light bulbs. Even in 2006, I could tell the first, however many minutes of the movie were dire and super serious and quite bang on the money. And then, poor Al Gore, I think, just didn't have a sense of how to come out of it, how to solve it. So he was like, change your light bulbs. And it was like that whole individual action thing, right? Which we get into and talk about a little bit. So that was the first thing. The second thing was Jim Hansen, the NASA scientist. At the time, I think he was still the director of the Goddard Institute of Space Studies. I was in New York City halfway through my physics PhD at the time. I was studying astrophysics, gravitational waves specifically. And so every week at the Columbia Physics Department, we had somebody come in and give a talk, people that were successful in their fields, in condensed matter, in astronomy, in astro, in whatever kind of physics. They'd come in and give a talk. And it wasn't very common to have a colloquium talk from an earth scientist. But Jim Hansen came in and he talked about the energy imbalance on planet Earth, and how big it was, and what the implications of that were. So that's the fact that there's more energy coming into planet Earth right now than going out of planet Earth into space. And there's this thing in physics called conservation of energy, which means like basically, obviously, if you've got more energy coming in than going out, the planet has no choice but to get hotter, which is exactly what's happening, right? So essentially, sunlight has stayed the same, pretty constant, maybe even slightly dimmer over the last few decades. Very slightly, like I don't know what the kind of the percent level is. What's in my brain?
I've not personally noticed, so I think it's probably quite slight.
Yeah, it's quite slight. And then you have all these greenhouse gases, these molecules that interact with the outgoing black body radiation from planet Earth. So the planet's surface and its atmosphere are, at a particular temperature. So they quantum mechanically emit infrared radiation because that's the temperature range that they're in. Something hotter can emit visible light in black body, like a red hot, molten iron or something, right? So that's hotter than the Earth's surface or the atmosphere. You have this infrared radiation, and it's interacting quantum mechanically with the carbon dioxide molecules and the methane, the carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels, the methane from extracting the fossil fuels, the nitrous oxide from agriculture, water molecules too, although water molecules that's just part of the Earth system. So there's, they're not long lived, and they kind of help keep our planet at a habitable temperature, because without any greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, it would be a frozen ball of ice. But anyway, now we have the opposite problem, which is though that outgoing radiation can't escape as easily, some of it gets re-radiated back down to the Earth, so the Earth is heating up. Anyway, there's aerosols, which complicate the situation, et cetera. So he came and talked about all of that, and I was on the edge of my seat because, I mean, to me, it's super bad that the planet's getting irreversibly hotter. And again, like, to go back to people's brains, I don't understand how anyone cannot be freaked out by that. It's like this 4.5 billion-year-old planet with all of this life on it, which is like so kind of delicately attuned to sort of like the near past climate conditions. I mean, and we've had 5 mass extinctions, which have, most of them have been driven by changes in the climate, right? Yeah. So we know that when you have a great big, like quasi irreversible change in climate, you have a huge dip in biodiversity or a mass extinction. So it's catastrophic to life on Earth. And here we are causing one. And anyway, so that was the second thing. And then the third thing was I had my first kid in 2006, and that kind of changed my perspective, shifted me from, just being sort of like a selfish 20-something kind of trying to have fun and, trying to move up in my career, trying to impress ladies and stuff like that, right? And then suddenly I had this little kid, and it kind of kicked me out of that sort of what I kind of think of as selfish careerism. And
so your kid must be in their early teens right now, I guess.
Yeah, so he's 17 now. Right. Yeah,
so like
he's a high school senior.
What's that conversation like between you two? Because you're a scientist that understands this such a depth of knowledge. What's that like with your son, kind of having that conversation? Because I find it difficult at work, because I work in climate as well for a local government in England, and it's like, how do I tell you everything's so bad without getting the 1,000-yard stare from them to do something? Like, how do you deal with that as a parent?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't have a super satisfying answer. Okay. I mean, he in his college essays, he talked about climate change a lot, but it wasn't really on like talking about like going out and doing civil disobedience. It was more kind of in the sort of like kind of well-worn, what I would kind of call the well-worn institutional grooves of climate institutes at the various universities, and sort of engineering of solar panels, and better climate communication. Right. So he definitely gets that we're in a serious problem, but I think his brain is still kind of with the majority of human brains, and just kind of thinking that we need a little more technology, and we need,
Right.
to communicate better, and we need to have better policies, right? Whereas I'm kind of like, I'm personally kind of freaking out a little more than he is.
Hmm.
Although I guess to answer your question more directly, I sort of answer his questions and as honestly as I can. If he
Yeah.
asks me, I think maybe he kind of knows that my nervous system is at a higher level of emergency mode than his. So
Anxiousness. Yeah.
that might cause him to think twice before asking me a lot of stuff.
Oh no.
When they were both smaller several years ago, and when Greta's Fridays for Future thing was going really strong, I encouraged them to make some signs and sort of stand out by theirs. And I kind of did this with them off to the side, but they quite enjoyed that. They would hold signs like during the drop off time,
Yeah.
and a bunch of their friends would come and join them. And sometimes a parent would honk their car horn at them. And then they would jump up and down and cheer. So I have fond memories of that. And I kind of was like basically trying to give them the message that climate activism can be fun, but
Right.
that didn't, I don't know what they're going to do in the future, but like now in high school, they haven't really done like that much in the way of climate activism. And
we've just entered 2024. Now, as a climate scientist, 2023, yeah, you were sort of like the front line. You saw all the data. You saw things that perhaps people in the general public don't know about. Now, in a year that was pretty cataclysmic, is there anything that really stood out for you in 2023 from what you saw as a scientist that made you think, whoa, even I didn't expect that?
Yeah, well, I think it's probably the same thing as probably what stands out to you guys. Well, I guess there's kind of two things. So one is those charts that we all saw with, you had like the last 20 years kind of with the seasonal sine wave in like, we're talking about like Earth's
sea temperature,
global, yes, sea surface temperature, and also just like global land surface temperature, and also sea ice melt, which is like super related to sea surface temperature.
Yeah.
But yeah, you got that seasonal annual sine wave, and every year it's getting a little bit hotter, or the ice is getting a little bit less. But it's like if you make the lines fat enough, they kind of like touch each other, right? And you're kind of like moving up on the y-axis, which to me, the way my brain works, by the way, is terrifying. Just like for every year to be getting a little bit hotter, I'm like, well, project that into the future 10 years or 20 years. And, like that's the way my nervous system works. And I don't know why. But then in 2023, you started getting those same traces that to me were already terrifying enough, just started going crazy. And something very, very different seems to be happening right now. And I personally don't understand what that is. And I would actually hypothesize that, the climate science community in general doesn't have a good understanding of what that is, which is also kind of really scary to me. The second thing is just like the pace, the kind of cadence of disasters. Like I'm in the US, I'm mostly thinking in terms of the US, but just all of the flooding in the Northeast and the smoke in New York City on the East Coast. I recently moved from California to the East Coast. All the fires throughout Canada. It just seemed like this summer, we couldn't escape anywhere you drove to. Like I had a friend who was kind of driving around the Northeast for a few weeks, and everywhere she went, it was just like she was kind of going into the next climate disaster. And so that was that felt really like a new thing, where instead of having like one big global like heating disaster in a summer, it was just like felt sort of constant.
Well, the thing for me this year was what happened in Greece and Bulgaria, where there was like wildfires in, I think it was in July, and then catastrophic flooding literally straight after it. So the damage that was caused by the wildfires even like made the flooding even worse, because the ground and the trees and everything were all done in. And it was just, if that's, like you say, the cadence of stuff that's going to happen, we're in a very different place than we were even just a year ago.
Yeah, Michael Mann used to use this phrase over and over and over again for a lot of years, he'd say like, we've reached a new normal. And it would always make the hair on the back of my neck stand up when he said that. Cause I'm like, no way, man. Like, this is not the new normal. We are on an escalator to hotter temperatures and deeper impacts.
Yeah.
So it's not like we've gotten to like a slightly worse plateau and we're going to have to learn to live with it.
Yeah.
Literally, as long as we keep burning fossil fuels, things are going to get worse and worse and worse. And the physics of planet Earth doesn't give a shit about, you know, habitability
Politics.
for humans. Yeah, or politics. But like, it's not like global heating is going to say, oh, we've gotten hot enough where now it's like a little worse for the humans. And they're going to have to learn to adapt and deal with that. But we're going to keep it there now. That's not how it works. It'll literally just, like, there's so many planets in the universe, even in our own solar system, that are completely uninhabitable. And a lot of that uninhabitability is due to temperature, right? I mean, now like we're at this really weird moment where we've got this great space telescope, and well, a couple of them, but one super new, amazing one, you know, fishing for exoplanets in the universe and pulling them out faster than you can possibly imagine, looking for planets that might have life. We haven't found a planet that has life, obviously. Found some, like a few that are in habitable zones and probably have liquid water and so on.
But they're not very close.
They're not close. And it's just super weird to me that we're, in a weird way, kind of like appreciating how absolutely precious and special Earth is, and kind of like have these eyes to the rest of the universe. But somehow we have this incredible collective blind spot, this lack of wisdom in terms of the respect and the connection to Mother Earth, right? Like, I think we're basically like out of connection with Earth.
You did mention about the climate and the science community, and you're also a part of a group called Scientist Rebellion. So can you just explain to us, when there was a moment where you were a scientist, you realized that, you know, just saying the truth and just showing data wasn't enough, it wasn't changing things. And so you and probably hundreds, if not thousands of other scientists, some that we've also interviewed ourselves, you've taken a step into sort of a scientist activist role. Could you just explain it again? You know, similar to the first question, was there a moment, was it a series of events where you suddenly said, you know what, I need to get out on the street, I really need to do something other than my science work to try and really push this message?
Yeah. So, okay. So two parts to that answer. So one is just love, you know, like I love people. I love the earth. I love forests up in the mountains. I love coral reefs, etc. So I just love it on Earth so much. And I love this life so much. And I see, from where I'm sitting, I see just catastrophic danger, right? That all of life on Earth is in right now. And I really believe we are on this pathway towards billions of deaths, and parts of the planet becoming literally uninhabitable just from like humid heat and, you know, deep food system collapse, where like we just can't, you know, agriculture can no longer support this many humans because it's too hot to grow maize in the places where we usually grow maize, for example. Like, so that this is not to even mention the geopolitical destabilization that's going to come from all of this stuff, right? And it looks like a lot of nations are already heading towards fascism, and I do wonder whether that could be partly like almost like a collective subconscious result to global heating, or a response to global heating, right? Like collectively humanity is getting more afraid and like worried about scarcity, worried about immigrants moving from places that are too hot for them to live, or where they
definitely
can't grow.
I would definitely say that fascism rises where resources are very scarce. So that's definitely a trajectory I can see really clearly. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So yeah, one thing is just love, right? And this and grief, which I think is related to love, right? So I had moments back starting in 2006 where I would just it would just like hit me like a pile driver in my psyche, how sad this was, how tragic this was, and tears would stream down my face, and I would like, I can't believe this is happening while I'm alive, right? And I have to do something to stop this and intervene because I love it so much. And the second part of my answer has to do with theories of change, right? So that goes back a little bit to what I was talking about with the insiders and the outsiders. if you look at social movements like civil rights in the United States, there were like pretty kind of radical side to the civil rights movement that doesn't get quite as much airplay in the media and in the history, but that sort of makes the space. It kind of like it kind of forces the powers that be, the status quo, to like allow the less radical part of the movement to have a seat at the table.
This is
And then,
Andreas Malm's idea, isn't it, as well?
yeah, and he's not the only one who said that, but yeah, I did read his book and I thought it was quite good actually, and I agree with that perspective. I thought he did a pretty convincing job when he was discussing those histories. Yes, but yeah, that I am really echoing that sentiment from that book, which everyone should read. How to Blow Up a Pipeline. By the way, excellent book, really thought-provoking, even if you don't agree with 100% of it, still a great read. Again, my brain doesn't understand how people can still be in denial. And my first instinct back in like 2008, 2009, 2010, when there really wasn't much of a climate movement, there was like 350.org. And I did some stuff with them, but I was super unimpressed. So I'm sure 350 is super great now and everything. But back in 2009, we were doing like art stuff and we would like lay our bodies on a field in the shape of something, and then a helicopter would come and take a picture, and then they would post it on Facebook. And I'm like, this is even worse than changing light bulbs. So, so I got kind of turned off from that part of the movement, and I'm sure there's other stuff happening. I went to Citizens Climate Lobby for a while. I got really frustrated that they weren't kind of radical enough, and they were like kind of politely asking, congressional members of Congress to, enact climate policy. They called it fee and dividend. I call it a climate income because I think that's a better name. But then, I started to, I just kind of realized that I didn't like the feeling of burning fossil fuel myself. So I got a little bit obsessed with reducing my own emissions for a couple of years, and I really enjoy that. And that kind of, the fact that I enjoyed reducing my emissions, and everyone else was saying like, we can't reduce our emissions, that would suck, like it's going to be too much of a sacrifice. That led me to write my book, which came out in 2017. And even as I was writing my book, I'm like, we got to start doing civil disobedience. We got to do more kind of disruptive stuff, because I just think there's too many words and too much talk about climate emotion too, and just not enough actual action. And so then I finally got up the courage basically to do my first arrestable action with Scientist Rebellion and Extinction Rebellion in Los Angeles in April of 2022. I can't believe it's 2024 already. And that was just so much more powerful than anything else I've done, that my understanding, my kind of theory of social change and theory of how brains work was that like there's these layers of denial, both in individual brains, and then that translates to this collective denial that we're in, which those of us who know we're in an emergency all feel so frustrated by. But the civil disobedience somehow just like sliced to the core of both of those onions in a really powerful way, because people couldn't just rationalize away a NASA climate scientist getting arrested and 100 cops in riot gear leading me into the police van, and risking my job for this, like, and saying some emotional words while right before I got arrested. They're like, oh, he really means it. Yeah, when you're speaking emotionally from the heart, and I call that emotional truth, then people it's sort of like, I think the empathy center in their brains kick on or something, and somehow like this bridge between their subconscious and conscious is made, and they can't look away, and they start to understand that, oh, this scientist is actually really worried. And I think, to me, that's part of my theory of change with Scientist Rebellion, and that's why I'm working so hard to try to activate the American Geophysical Union to get more Earth scientists speaking out and even doing kind of risky actions, engaging in civil disobedience. I think that when the scientific community is kind of like, talking in science words and showing charts and being all serious, and then saying like, thank you, are there any questions? And, just like complete monotone, people are like, well, that plot looks a little concerning, but I'm not a scientist. So that he's the scientist or she's the scientist, she doesn't look that worried. she seems fine. So I guess I'm not going to worry yet. I've got like 99 other problems to worry about this week, right? And global heating's not one of them. I'm gonna, take my cue from those scientists. So just the mere fact of scientists seeming to be calm, I think, is sending like a message of basically anesthesia to society and to kind of like adding to that collective denial. So I think it would be super helpful for, if not just hundreds of scientists who are engaging in civil disobedience, but like thousands, tens of thousands of scientists all joined together and said, like, we're freaked out for our kids, we're freaked out for ourselves. This has to stop. These policymakers say they're listening to the science. This really gets me. I'm furious at Joe Biden. I know the other guy's even worse, but Joe Biden literally said, listen to the scientists when he was campaigning, right? And he said, no more drilling on federal lands. He made all these promises, and look what he's doing. He's expanding fossil fuels faster, pretty much faster than any world leader, pretty much faster than Trump did. United States has kind of pole vaulted into being like the biggest producer of fossil gas. Months, I think. So yeah, I'm deeply frustrated and angry at politicians continuing to expand fossil fuels, which is literally anti-science and ignoring scientists, ignoring our message. I don't know what else to do. I mean, like I feel like there has to be a movie or something with like a climate scientist who's like Rambo and just like, out like, like messing things up because like the politicians just aren't listening or something. I don't know. Like,
well, Peter, there was that film, wasn't there, Don't Look Up, and it was interesting because you said that one of your three moments that made you worry about climate change was also a documentary by Al Gore, a very famous one. And that is interesting because a lot of people I speak to, it is these documentaries or these films that first really sort of shake them to the core. But what often happens is nothing you can really do behind it. So that energy and that fear and that grief, it kind of dissipates as you settle back into your normal life. But I also just want to touch on, you do these actions, but there's also a perception of what the media portrays and what it edits and how it frames things. And I know that you're also quite passionate about sort of media representation in regards to the climate crisis. America may be one of the strangest or the worst types of framing when it comes to the climate crisis. Everything's very has to be spectacular. It has to be, razzmatazz. It's almost like a game show or a movie itself. Looking at some of the news clips in America, and they seem to be very hyper focused on sound bites and big events. Not so much on the detail and the depth of these things and the complexity of the climate crisis. So, as someone who's passionate about that sort of media portrayal, tell us about some of the work or some of the groups you've been involved with trying to get the media to portray the climate crisis in its authentic light.
Yeah, well, a friend of mine, Harold Moss, and we co-founded a group that was originally called Climate Ad Project. We've since changed to being an Undeniable Network, and we're trying to. It's pretty hard because we managed to hire one staff member last year, but other than that, we're all volunteer, and before that, we were all volunteers. So it's a very slow roll, but we're doing like kind of explainers where I'll like explain some climate science thing and funny animated videos. We want to do kind of interviews with voices from around the world, especially the global South, and so on. So we're trying to get that going. I don't know. It feels really like David versus Goliath, where the mainstream media, there's three really key ways in which they are lying by omission to the public. Even the New York Times. So they'll like if there's a big heat wave or there's a big flood, they'll write a story about that. And the stories are usually pretty good, like the stuff that they do say. But the things that they omit, number one, this is caused primarily by fossil fuels, by burning
Bingo.
fossil.
Yeah.
That's what's causing it. They never say that. Never.
Yeah. Same in the UK.
Yeah. Number two, the second thing they should say is that, and the fossil fuel industry has been lying for decades and blocking action and bribing politicians and spreading disinformation. And that's important to know because that's part of why we're still here. Yeah. So literally the fact that we had this huge heat wave or the fact that we had this huge wildfire smoke event or wildfire or the fact that Maui that burned down, or Greece. Literally, the reason for that is because of burning fossil fuels, and because the fossil fuel industry has been lying for decades. Because if it hadn't been, we probably would have collectively done something about this, and then that event would have happened. So it's literally part of the story. And the third thing that they need to say is these sorts of events will continue to become more frequent and more intense the more fossil fuels we burn. They never say either of those, any of those three things. And as a result, the public is still confused. Like, most people don't even know what's causing global heating. I think some people are starting to realize, oh, okay, the earth is getting hotter. But they'll, like, I talk to people and they literally say to me, I'm like, well, what's causing global heating? And they'll tell me, plastics. It's plastic pollution, or they'll say, and I'll say, like, well, what do we have to do to stop? And they'll say, like, we have to recycle more, or we have to compost more, right? The majority of people do not mention fossil fuels or the fossil fuel industry, which is just absolutely alarming and remarkable and pretty shocking to me. I mean, no, that's just anecdotal, but anyway, this is because of the media doing such a poor job reporting this story, right? And they don't know how to connect. Like, they'll report the one fire, but they don't know how to be like this is all connected to all those floods and the losing the avocado crop or whatever, right? Like, it's all connected together, but they don't make those connections. And so the public still kind of has this feeling that all we need is a little bit more solar panels and electric cars and we'll be fine, and maybe to recycle, right?
I think a part of it is, like, I think technological solutions like that, they feel easy. You can imagine your life doesn't have to change very much if you go from having a gas powered car to an electric car, and also, like, that also means you don't have to challenge the ideas around wealth distribution at the same time, because like, well, we can all stay in the strata we're in without dealing with the what a better way of putting it, the energy imbalance in the economy, to kind of wrap it all together. I kind of wanted to...
I just wanted to say, Andrew, comment on that a little bit. I don't see any way out of this without some kind of wealth distribution. So I know, like, conservatives that might be, they're probably not listening, but if they were, they'd be like, oh, he's a communist. That's not the case at all. Like,
we are communists, that's fine.
Well, I'm further on the left, but ideologically speaking, it's a moot point. Like, practically speaking, we need to redistribute the wealth. Otherwise, we're not going to make change, because, like, you saw the Yellow Jacket movement in France, for example. If you try to address, ramping down fossil fuels and transitioning to renewables, for example, and you try to fund that system in a way that creates more inequity and that causes the working class household, average household, to suffer more, then what are they going to do? They're going to be like, hey, this sucks. I got to get to work. I can't afford gas anymore. You didn't give me any viable replacement. So you're getting voted out of office, and I'm going to vote in that jerk who says climate change is a hoax, right? And so then that policy gets reversed. And the same dynamic happens internationally, right? If you have, and we haven't even mentioned the United Nations stuff yet. Like, there's a new news story today. I guess they picked the guy for COP29 next year, and it's another, like, fossil fuel
Azerbaijan.
Yeah, and that president of the COP's going to be another, like, I guess, former fossil fuel executive. I mean, it's just like, we've learned nothing.
Well,
so
he'll really know where all the fossil fuel is and not to touch it. So that's great. I'm really pleased that they've chosen someone like that. We're going to wrap up very shortly and kind of have a quick questions about the election that's coming up and your kind of thoughts on that positioning. But I quickly wanted to ask you about, kind of on the other side of the conversation, the people that are kind of, inside the tent, for want of a better phrase of putting it. Like, there is a real heavy emphasis on carbon dioxide as the problem. And, someone who works on decarbonisation in my day-to-day job, trying to talk about things around biodiversity and, do
Mhm.
you think carbon takes up too much space in the mind of people working on climate projects, and actually we need to kind of, should it be a slightly wider view, or do you think actually if we sort that out, then we'll have space to do everything else afterwards?
That's a good question. Generally speaking, I mean, I think, okay, so in my model of like kind of what's causing this crisis, it's kind of roughly 80% fossil fuel industry, 15% industrial animal agriculture, and then 5% other stuff like cement production and stuff like that. So, I mean, if we focused on fossil fuels and industrial animal agriculture, we'd essentially eliminate the carbon dioxide and the methane, most of the methane. And then also if we if we basically started eating way less meat, then we could stop growing so much soybeans in the Amazon and actually make some space for biodiversity to start recovering. So the two biggest things that are threatening biodiversity right now are global heating and just cutting down forests to grow
cattle
feed
farms
for animals, basically, so that people can eat cheap meat. So once you address those two things, you've more or less addressed the biodiversity crisis. I mean, as good as you can do. And then I think if you get rid of the fossil fuel industry, you'll also basically take care of the plastic problem more or less as a kind of a
so you really
good
see
thing.
it as the heart of the problem. That's where our focus should be, almost.
I think there's been a lot of misinformation about, for example, animal agriculture. And then there's this thing that, again, like a weird way that people's brains work, where it seems like a lot of people can only focus on one piece of the problem at a time. Like there's a lot of people who think that nuclear is the way out, and that's like literally all they can talk about. And it's like they're blind to everything else, and it's just very weird the way their brains work. And it's quite unhelpful.
I think that's kind of to do with how, like, I don't know, the internet has rot our brains. Is that you have to find your niche in something and then must talk about it incessantly to have some kind of clout.
I think you got to keep your eye on the ball. Global heating and biodiversity are inextricably linked, right? And the food system, those three things are totally linked together. And 80% of that global heating problem is fossil fuels. So it does make sense to really focus on that. And roughly 15% is animal agriculture. And then right now, I would say the animal agriculture and the forest loss is probably maybe the bigger driver of biodiversity loss, but that's probably going to change at some point in the near future as the planet gets hotter and hotter, and more extinctions will be directly caused by global heating. And I think it's hard to estimate like those two drivers of biodiversity loss, like how, because the one thing about biodiversity is we don't even know like what we have right now. Like we haven't taken a good inventory of so to talk about what we're losing, like first we got to get like for example, like a global biodiversity observing system that involves kind of next generation satellites just to even know what we have. So it's very, very hard to say like, oh yeah, right now it's 40% global heating driving biodiversity loss and 60%, loss of habitat, which is mostly for food production. But anyway, those are the two things right now. Like humanity's having a fossil fuel and food production crisis, and that's kind of stemming from the thing that lies under that is this sort of inequity and capitalism. So all of this stuff kind of follows directly out of hundreds of years of colonial extractivist thinking. And then you can even, some people take it even further back, about 10,000 years ago when agriculture arose. But I personally believe we can probably have a sustainable agriculture and sedentary civilization if we just learn to like really respect Earth, be in connection with Mother Earth, and stop feeling like we have to take everything. And that's going to be a really big shift. I mean, we can't even avoid escalating into war, right? Like it's just a fact that we need wealth redistribution to get out of this. Otherwise, so getting out of this means limiting collapse in my mind at this point. So limiting collapse and allowing the next few generations to slowly recover instead of spiraling into this kind of like really horrible, mostly uninhabitable Earth with very little biodiversity and, probably really violent remnants of humanity, like trying to eke out an existence, right? That's not the future that any of us want. But I think that's the future that we're sort of like heading for still. Yeah, and I don't know. That's why I fight and speak out as much as I can, because I feel like.
And I think as well, Peter, I think the material conditions, that the reality of our material conditions, is what shifts our consciousness. So if we can dismantle fossil fuels, it means that we consciously have had a shift globally that have allowed us to then do that. So I would hope that after that, more things would follow almost naturally as the material conditions change. But Peter, I'd just like to, I know we've kept you longer than we probably should have done, but just got one last question for you, because you've got a really important election coming this year, perhaps maybe the most important of all our lifetimes. Now, you've got two candidates. None of them are fantastic. But one, especially when we're on this side of the pond, we're looking at one, an orange one with blonde hair, and thinking, oh my days, if this guy gets in again, the environment is a DOA. So is it? Do you see it in those terms as well? How bad would a Trump election presidency be, the second term? How are you viewing it over there? What are some of the consequences of the election if it goes either way? Fill us in, Peter. What is going on over there? What's your feelings around this election?
Well, I'm furious at the Democrats for not doing a better job. I mean, it was like it's their election to
lose.
How do you say it? Yeah, to lose, I guess. I mean, like, they should have had this thing so easy. I don't think they should have run Joe Biden as a candidate a second time. I think he was a weak candidate and they could have found someone better, but I just don't think they're very imaginative. Like, to me, they really kind of represent that sort of institutional inertia and sort of like protecting the status quo, which is maybe an okay strategy when everything on planet Earth is like hunky-dory. But when you have this like rapidly accelerating emergency, you really have to have the courage to challenge the status quo and to think a little bit bigger and to really inspire people. And I'm furious at Joe Biden for not even using the bully pulpit. Like, he claims that he was forced to like expand fossil fuels and approve the Willow Project and support that. He claims that the courts forced him to do that, but that's actually not true. I think he felt the political expediency to do that. I think he's got deep ties to the fossil fuel industry, so that was like his comfort zone. And I literally don't think he genuinely believes that global heating is the emergency that it is. And he's 81 too, right? So I think people that old just naturally have a fundamentally different view on how dangerous, on average, on how dangerous global heating is. I've heard a lot of older people tell me, and it breaks my heart, that like, well, it's not my problem, I'm not going to be here much longer, which is just such an uncompassionate thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm furious at the Democrats. The Republicans are horrible, kind of fascist, anti-science people. The ones that are sort of good Republicans, like, they're not good because they're still not challenging the bad ones, right? So they're basically complicit and allowing this to happen. So to me, the whole party is completely rotten. I don't think of this election in terms of the environment being completely, one candidate's going to save things for Earth and the other one's going to destroy Earth, because we've seen both of them in office for, almost full terms. Like, one of them had a full term, one of them has 3 years of his term, and their records in terms of global heating are almost the same, right? So, and the Democrats keep saying, like, we're going to do more about global heating, and they tell us that election after election, and nothing happens. So, so like, fool me once, shame on me, but fool me 10 times or fool me 28 times in the terms of like the United Nations, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me 28 times, shame on me.
So in your feeling, then, do you not think the Inflation Reduction Act has done anything to move the needle at all in terms of like America's position in the climate?
Not really. No. I mean, I think what it's done is it's allowed the Democrats to continue this narrative for a little bit longer that they're doing something about climate. But it's like, the way I think of it is like they're driving a big rig down the highway, and it's going too fast and it's heading right towards a brick wall and it's going to crash. And they're tapping the brake a tiny little bit. That's the Inflation Reduction Act. But they have the accelerator pedal all the way down to the floor. That's the Willow Project, the Mountain Valley Pipeline, all of the increase in drilling on federal lands. You can't expand fossil fuels, which is the main cause of global heating, and then act like you're doing something to stop it. And not only that, but again, what makes me so furious is like the Biden administration could have chosen, they could have said to themselves, hey, the fossil fuel industry has been lying for decades. They're still lying. They testified in front of Congress and they promised to keep lying, which they literally did. So we better spend some money, allocate some money to push back against that and inform the public of what's happening and how dangerous this is. That would be using the bully pulpit. They could have advertised, they could have put up billboards, they could have had all kinds of programs to educate students, et cetera, et cetera. They did none of that, right? So I just really have they haven't even declared a climate emergency. So I have a very, very hard time believing that the Democrats care at all about global heating, despite what they say. Okay. Now, the way I do think about this election is that if Trump gets back in office, I agree with a lot of the pundits that are saying that could be the end of the United States as we know it. So to me, I think about it more in terms of democracy, abortion, other things, which would be super horrible if Trump came back into office. But it's just hard for me to imagine Biden suddenly after his, not just the 3 years in office, but his whole career, he's been a fossil fuel guy. So it's just very hard for me to see him pivoting at age 81 or 82 and suddenly actually being the climate leader that we need.
Peter,
he's a very followery type politician, right? Like he's not like a Churchill or a Kennedy or somebody maybe who kind of actually does a little bit more leading.
Peter, do you not think it's just because of the systemic way that politics is set up with so much money from the fossil fuel industries, pretty much propping up politics in all our countries?
Yeah, Citizens United was absolutely disastrous. I think other countries have their own versions of Citizens United. I mean, that kind of capital, again, it goes back hundreds of years. Like the families that are rich now, a lot of them grew rich off of owning slaves. They grew rich off of fossil fuel extraction, off of enclosing the land that used to be a commons, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I'm an eco-socialist, right? So you can trace the current accumulations of capital directly back to all of that genocide and slavery and horrible stuff, which has led us also right down that road leads directly to catastrophic global heating, which we're in right now. And that accumulation of capital, in addition to warping the media, which we've already discussed, in the fossil fuel industry, there was a great piece that came out recently. I think it was what was it? It was DeSmog, I think. Was it Amy Westervelt? And it was about how the fossil fuel industry basically takes these socially respected institutions like the New York Times and Reuters and essentially pays them advertising money so that they do these kind of like fakey infomercial things that look like they might be a New York Times. Anyway, the point is the New York Times is not our friend in terms of stopping climate change. But even worse, these corporations, that accumulation of capital controls our political structure as well. So the whole thing has been bought by the fossil fuel industry essentially. And that's why it's very hard to go back to Andreas Malm. Like it's very hard for me to see how we get out of this without an actual revolution, not like a figurative revolution, like an actual revolution, because the rich people in charge that have all the power, they've just made it so clear that they don't give a shit about catastrophic global heating. Maybe they don't think that billions of people are going to die from this, or maybe they don't care. I'm not sure which. It would blow my mind if they relinquished power voluntarily, redistributed wealth, spent that hoarded capital that they have, which they're using to kind of take us even more into danger. They started using that hoarded capital to distribute to people and to transform energy. Humanity could totally stop global heating in the next 5 years. I'm certain of that. If we collectively wanted to, and if we could somehow kind of come out of this madness of billionairism and corporatism that's built on genocide and slavery. If we could somehow figure out a way to do that, but the thing is, I just don't see how we do that without an actual revolution, right? Given historic, and then if we do have an actual revolution, that usually doesn't go too well on the far side of that. So, so this is a very, very hard problem socially.
Well, Peter,
to the barricades, my friends.
Peter, I had no idea you were revolutionary. Otherwise, I would have started with that. But we've run out of time, mate. Listen, it's great to hear, honestly, that you're identifying as an eco-socialist. In regards to framing, I'm honestly wanted to I might start a campaign this year to say that all socialists must now identify as eco-socialists, because to me, to be a socialist, but not to now incorporate the environment, is you're not understanding how socialism has evolved to the material conditions that we live in today, not the glamour, not the romanticized version of Che Guevara. Socialism today has to incorporate environmentalism. So for me, every socialist should now be identified as an eco-socialist. So it's fantastic to hear that, Peter. Listen, we've run out of time. You've been a fantastic guest, mate. Honestly, it sounds like the work you're doing is really important. So please, mate, on behalf of everyone over here, keep up the good work, mate. Keep us in the loop, and we'll follow you closely, mate. And listen, anything we can promote, we will do. But thank you so much for your time today, Peter.
Yeah, and the shout out, just real quick, will probably have to go to Scientist Rebellion. So you scientists out there, thank you for the risks that you're taking. You are my brothers and sisters, and I love you so much. And try to radicalize your colleagues, because that's going to take a lot more than that. But I think having a really kind of a very large number of radicalized scientists would make such a difference right now. So Brilliant. Thank you, guys. Great to talk to you.
Peter, thank you so much, my friend. All the best, mate.
Cheers.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Cheers, pal.